Right now, beneath the city you live in, or the city nearest to you, there is water moving. Not through pipes installed by a municipal contractor in the last century, not through the cast iron mains that your city's infrastructure department has on record. Through something older, something that in dozens of documented cases has no construction record, no founding date, no engineering origin that any official body has been able to identify. Water moving through stone channels that predate the cities built above them. In some cases, predate the nations that claim jurisdiction over the ground they run beneath. This is not a theory. This is an engineering problem that cities are actively managing right now, today, in ways that almost never make the news and almost never prompt the question that the situation most obviously demands. Who built these? Let me start with what we're told, because the official framing is worth taking seriously before we examine where it breaks down. The standard history of urban water infrastructure follows a clean, satisfying arc. Ancient Rome had aqueducts, sophisticated ones, and we know this because Rome documented everything: the engineers, the contracts, the labor, the costs, the political figures who commissioned each project. Roman aqueducts are among the best documented construction projects of the ancient world. After Rome, the story goes, much of that knowledge was lost. The medieval period saw a retreat from large-scale hydraulic engineering, and then gradually, fitfully, across the Renaissance and into the industrial era, cities rediscovered and rebuilt the capacity to move water at scale. That is the arc. Knowledge, loss, rediscovery. It is a coherent story. It accounts for what we see in most places most of the time, but it does not account for what engineers keep finding underneath cities that have no Roman history, no medieval hydraulic tradition, no documented engineering lineage that connects them to any known water management civilization, and it does not account for why those systems, in case after case, across continents that never had contact with Rome, are still functional. Let me be specific, because specificity is where this stops being abstract. In 1856, workers excavating the foundation of a new administrative building in the center of what is now a mid-sized European city encountered a stone channel at a depth of approximately 4 meters. The channel was precisely cut, sealed with a lime-based compound that showed no significant degradation and was carrying water. Not standing water, moving water. The channel was still active. The workers reported it. Engineers were called. The engineers documented the channel's dimensions, its slope gradient, its direction of travel, and then, in a decision that would be repeated in city after city across the following decades, they routed the new building's drainage into it and moved on. No excavation to determine the channel's extent, no investigation into its origin, no attempt to trace where it came from or where it was going. It was functional. It was there. They used it. And they filed a report that described it simply as a pre-existing drainage feature of unknown origin. That phrase, pre-existing drainage feature of unknown origin. I have encountered it, or close variants of it, in infrastructure records from cities across Europe, North Africa, South Asia, and the Americas. It appears in Victorian engineering surveys. It appears in early American municipal reports. It appears in colonial administrative documents from regions where the colonial authority had been present for less than a generation and was encountering infrastructure that clearly predated their arrival by what the physical evidence suggested was centuries, pre-existing drainage feature of unknown origin. It is a phrase designed to close a question, to file it, to move on, and it has been extraordinarily effective because most of the time nobody went back. Here's the first anomaly. The distribution of these systems does not follow the distribution of known ancient civilizations. If undocumented water infrastructure were simply the remnants of Roman engineering, or of the sophisticated Islamic hydraulic traditions of the medieval period, or of the well-documented canal systems of Mesopotamia, you would expect the geographic distribution of unexplained water systems to cluster around those known civilizations, to trace their boundaries, to thin out as you moved away from the centers of documented hydraulic knowledge. That is not what the distribution shows. These systems appear in regions with no documented hydraulic engineering tradition. They appear in areas that were, according to the official historical record, sparsely populated frontier territories in the 18th and early 19th centuries. They appear beneath cities that were, on paper, founded in the colonial period, built from nothing by settlers who arrived with axes and ambition and no engineering corps sophisticated enough to have constructed what lies beneath the streets those settlers paved. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Lima, Peru. The city was founded by Francisco Pizarro in 1535 on what Spanish records describe as undeveloped coastal land. Within decades of the founding, Spanish colonial engineers were documenting and using water channels beneath the city, whose origins they could not explain and did not attempt to fully excavate. Modern infrastructure projects in Lima have repeatedly encountered these channels. Some are still active. The engineering assessments consistently describe construction techniques that do not match any known pre-Columbian tradition in the region, and do not match Spanish colonial construction practices either. They are, in the technical language of the reports, anomalous. Tehran, Iran. The Qanat system, an ancient form of underground water channel, is well documented in the Iranian plateau, and there is nothing anomalous about finding Qanats beneath Iranian cities. But beneath Tehran, engineers working on the city's expanding metro system in the late 20th and early 21st centuries encountered channels that did not match Qanat construction. Different materials, different engineering logic, different depth profiles. Some were integrated with the known Qanat network in ways that suggested they predated it, that the Qanats had been built to connect to something already there, rather than being the originating system. The reports on these anomalous channels are technical documents filed with the Municipal Infrastructure Authority. They are not secret. They are simply not discussed. Mexico City. Built on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, itself built on a lake, the city has had a water management problem since the Spanish drained Texcoco in the 17th century. Everyone knows this. What is less known is that drainage projects throughout the 20th century repeatedly encountered hydraulic infrastructure at depths and in locations inconsistent with both the Aztec construction record and the Spanish colonial engineering record. Infrastructure that appeared, based on material analysis, to be significantly older than Tenochtitlan. Some of it still functioning, some of it integrated without documentation into the city's current drainage system. This raises a simple but critical question. If these systems are everywhere, if engineers are finding them under cities on multiple continents, if municipal infrastructure authorities are quietly routing their drainage into them and filing reports that describe them as features of unknown origin, why is this not a major subject of historical and archaeological inquiry? I have thought about this question for a long time. I keep arriving at the same place. It is not that the question is being suppressed exactly. It is that the question is inconvenient in a very particular way, because the moment you take seriously the possibility that functional hydraulic infrastructure exists beneath cities with no documented builders, you are not just dealing with an archaeological mystery. You are dealing with a challenge to the foundational timeline of human civilization. And that challenge does not arrive as a dramatic confrontation. It arrives quietly, in a basement, in a filed report, in a phrase, pre-existing drainage feature of unknown origin. And here's where it becomes impossible to ignore: the demolition window. I keep returning to it because it keeps returning to everything. The same 30-year period, roughly 1880 to 1910, that saw the systematic demolition of pre-1900 hospitals, the mass renaming of cities, the retirement of Tartaria from the cartographic record, that same window is precisely when the first wave of large-scale urban infrastructure projects, sewers, metro systems, water mains, was being driven through the ground beneath the world's major cities. The timing is not incidental, because these projects, for the first time, gave municipal engineers systematic access to what was underneath. And what they found, repeatedly, consistently, across cities that had no documented relationship with each other, was infrastructure. Old infrastructure. Infrastructure that in some cases they could use, that in other cases they had to route around, that in almost every case they chose not to investigate further. The question that the timing opens up is not just who built these systems. It is whether the people managing the infrastructure projects of the 1880s and 1890s and 1900s knew what they were likely to find before they started digging, whether the drive to install modern municipal infrastructure in that specific window was in part a drive to encounter, document minimally, and then functionally absorb the systems that were already there, folding them into the new infrastructure in ways that would make them invisible, not secretly, not conspiratorially in any simple sense, but systemically. As a natural consequence of the incentive structure facing every municipal engineer who found a functioning channel in the ground beneath a modern city and had to decide, in a practical moment, under budget pressure and construction deadline, what to do with it. You route your drain into it. You file your report. You move on. And a generation later, nobody asks. Let me talk about the construction problem directly, because I think it deserves to stand on its own. Building a functional aqueduct or underground water channel at the scale of what has been found beneath cities like Lima and Mexico City and Tehran is not a simple engineering task. It requires survey capacity, the ability to measure elevation across long distances with enough precision to maintain a consistent gravity-driven slope. It requires material knowledge, specific compositions of lime mortar or stone fitting that can resist water infiltration and degradation over extended periods. It requires labor organization at a scale that leaves archaeological evidence, quarrying sites, material transport routes, settlement patterns associated with a large mobile workforce. And it requires hydrological knowledge, an understanding of where water comes from, how it moves through terrain, how to tap a source, and direct it to a destination across miles of varying geography. None of these requirements are invisible in the archaeological record. When the Romans built aqueducts, we can trace every stage. We know the quarries, we know the labor camps, we know the engineering survey methodology, we know the political context of each commission. The construction of large hydraulic infrastructure leaves a deep, multi-layered, unmistakable trace in the archaeological record, which is why the absence of that trace is so striking, because in case after case, what we find is the infrastructure itself, intact, functional, and then nothing. No quarry sites at the appropriate scale. No evidence of the labor force that would have been required. No settlement pattern consistent with the organizational complexity that the construction would have demanded. Just the channels, running through the ground, carrying water as if they had always been there, as if the ground had grown them. And here's the strangest part: the material analysis in several of these cases, analysis conducted by engineers who were not looking for anomalies and had no particular interest in producing controversial results, suggests construction dates that the standard historical timeline cannot accommodate. Not by a few decades, by centuries. In some cases, the material analysis has produced dates that would place the construction of these systems before the civilizations that supposedly built the cities above them existed as organized societies. These results are not hidden. They are published in technical journals with narrow readership. They are filed in infrastructure authority archives that nobody requests access to. They are present in the documentary record, waiting quietly for someone to ask. I am not a scientist. I am not making a material science claim. I am simply noting that the people who are qualified to make those claims have made them, and the absence of any serious institutional follow-up is itself a data point. Let me describe what I have come to think of as the inheritance pattern, because I think it is the key to understanding not just the aqueducts, but everything they connect to. When the settlers who would build Phoenix arrived in the Salt River Valley in the 1860s, they found canals. Not ruins of canals, canals. Functional enough that with clearing and reinforcement they could be put back into active use, which is exactly what happened. The settlers inherited a water system. They did not understand it fully, they could not explain who had built it, or precisely how, but they used it. They built a city that depended on it. And the man who named that city looked at the canals beneath his feet and said, "This is a place rising from the ruins of something prior," and he named it accordingly. That inheritance pattern, find infrastructure, use it, do not fully investigate it, build on top of it, is not unique to Phoenix. It is the pattern I keep finding everywhere I look, in Lima, in Mexico City, in Tehran, in the European cities where Victorian engineers encountered channels of unknown origin and routed their drainage into them, in the unnamed mid-sized city where workers in 1856 broke into a flowing stone channel 4 meters below the surface and filed a report and moved on. What changes when you see this as a pattern rather than as a series of unrelated local incidents is that the question shifts. The question is no longer who built any specific system. The question becomes what kind of civilization would need to build hydraulic infrastructure at this scale and this geographic distribution. What kind of civilization would require water management systems beneath what are now dozens of major cities on multiple continents? What kind of civilization would leave that infrastructure so completely, so uniformly, so consistently devoid of the construction record that should accompany it? And underneath that question is a quieter one that I find I cannot stop returning to. Is it possible that the absence of the construction record is not an accident of preservation? Is it possible that the construction record was removed? That what we are looking at is not the natural decay of documentation over centuries, but the deliberate, systematic removal of the evidence that would allow us to identify the builders? I cannot prove that. I want to be clear about what I can and cannot prove, but I can point to the pattern of the other removals. The hospital bells melted down in coordinated waves. the city names stripped by single administrative decrees, Tartaria contracting and vanishing from maps across a single generation of cartographic practice, the buildings without construction records appearing in the earliest photographs, already aged, already ancient, already settled into the earth as if they had always been there. What I can say is that the removal of evidence has been demonstrated elsewhere. What I can say is that the timing clusters. What I can say is that the infrastructure surveys of the 1880 to 1910 window would have given whoever was directing those projects an unprecedented opportunity to document, assess, and then quietly absorb whatever was beneath the ground, replacing the mystery with a pipe fitting and a filed report. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a description of what the documents show happened. The conspiracy, if there is one, would lie in the intention behind it. And intention is the one thing the documents almost never show. Here is what the official history of hydraulic engineering does not explain. It does not explain the distribution. It does not explain the absence of construction evidence. It does not explain why the material analysis in multiple cases points to dates that the timeline cannot accommodate. It does not explain why the systems are so often still functional, why a civilization capable of building water infrastructure that remains operational across what the material evidence suggests are centuries or millennia left no other trace of equivalent sophistication. It does not explain why the phrase pre-existing drainage feature of unknown origin appears so consistently across so many countries, so many languages, so many separate administrative traditions. And it does not explain the one thing that I keep coming back to, the thing that sits at the center of all of this and refuses to resolve. These systems are still being found. Not in the 19th century, not in the early 20th century when the big urban infrastructure drives were happening. Now, today, modern metro expansions in cities across Europe and Asia and Latin America are regularly encountering hydraulic infrastructure they cannot explain. Modern construction projects are finding channels that are not on any map, not in any archive, not in any engineering record. The engineers file their reports. They route around what they cannot use and route into what they can. They move on. The question is not buried. It is being actively not asked right now, in real time, in cities whose names you know, beneath streets you may have walked. I want to leave you with something specific, something that I think crystallizes what the aqueduct problem actually means beyond the engineering mystery of it. When a civilization builds water infrastructure, it is making a statement about the future. It is saying, we expect this place to be inhabited. We expect people to need water here. We are building something that will outlast us, that will serve whoever comes after. Water infrastructure is, almost by definition, a gift to the future. It is infrastructure designed to be inherited. And so, the question of who built the channels beneath Lima and Tehran and Mexico City, and the unnamed European city where workers broke into flowing water in 1856, is in a meaningful sense also a question about us, about what we are inheriting, about what was built for us, or at least built in anticipation of our being here, by someone whose name we do not know, whose civilization we cannot find in the textbooks, whose construction record has vanished as completely as if it had never existed. They built something that still works. They built something sophisticated enough that civilizations that came after them, civilizations that considered themselves advanced, simply used it rather than replacing it. They built something distributed enough to appear on multiple continents, in multiple climate zones, in geological conditions that would have required localized engineering knowledge to navigate, and then they are gone, and the infrastructure remains. The silence on that is deafening. I keep asking the same questions, and I keep not finding the answers in the places where the answers are supposed to be. Who had the engineering capacity to build these systems? Who had the geographic reach to build them on multiple continents simultaneously? Who had the organizational sophistication to build at this scale without leaving the archaeological trace that every civilization we know of leaves behind? What happened to them? What happened to their records? What happened to the knowledge of what they built and why they built it, and what they understood about water and the earth and the cities they seem to know with a certainty that looks almost prescient from here, would one day be built above their work? And the quieter question underneath all of those, the one I cannot answer, the one that brought me here, the one that I suspect brought you here, were we meant to find this? Were we meant to find the channels and ask the questions and sit in the archives with the infrastructure reports and the demolished building records and the cartographic retirements and the stripped city names and feel the shape of something enormous just below the surface of the official history? Something that the official history was built deliberately, methodically, with remarkable coordination across an implausibly narrow window of time to cover. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But the water is still moving. Beneath the streets, through channels that nobody built, according to any record anyone has been permitted to find. Still moving, still functional, still there, carrying water from somewhere to somewhere else, indifferent to the cities above it, indifferent to the histories those cities tell about themselves, indifferent to the question of whether anyone will ever ask, loudly enough, in the right place, with enough documentation behind them to make the question impossible to close with a phrase and a filing cabinet. Pre-existing drainage feature of unknown origin. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it.